Hi, this is Amy from Noble Character Crafts, and today I want to share with you how I make granny squares. Whenever I make a granny square, I always crochet over all of my ends so that I am not left with all of these ends, which a lot of times you will see when someone is working on a granny square project, they're left with all of their ends, which this is only a 3-round granny square, and of course you're left with 6 different ends if you don't crochet over your ends. And that can just be very overwhelming when you're working on a granny square project. You'll end up with countless ends at the end of your project typically. So whenever I'm making granny squares, I crochet over all of my ends, so I am left with a square like this, and I have crocheted over all of my ends except for the ones on the outside here. And as I continue working on my project, then I will also crochet over these ends. And when I'm all done with my project, then I just have a few ends at the end on the outside of my work typically that I'll need to weave in, but it's a lot less stressful for me to just work over my ends as I crochet along, and it's not quite as overwhelming then to have to deal with all of the ends at the end of a project. So I just wanted to share with you how I do that. Today I am using worsted weight yarn and an H 5mm hook, but of course this technique would be the same no matter what weight of yarn you are using. So I'll just start my granny square as I always do, which is with a slip stitch and then a chain of 4. I do a slip stitch into the first chain to make a loop, and then I chain 3 to start my first granny square cluster. And right away, as soon as I start my first granny square cluster, I'm going to bring my tail over my hook like this so that I can work over that tail from the very beginning. And I just hold that tail together with my left hand and continue working over it as I do my first round. I have gotten to nearly to the end of my first round. I am just on the very last stitch of my last cluster of granny square stitches. And here is my beginning tail that I started with. I like to give that a really good tug so that my center opening is closed up as much as possible. And on this stitch, when I just have 2 loops still on my hook, I, at that point, bring my tail up to my hook and work and hold it behind my hook like this. And I do that last stitch, drawing up that tail into my work. So now the tail is going to be on the outside of my work here, and I'll be able to crochet over even that little bit on my next round. So I'm going to finish off this round with a chain 2 and slip stitch into my first chain 3, and I can cut off that yarn. Also, as a side note, whenever I am working granny squares, most usually I rotate my work every round. So this is the right side, and whenever I start my second round, then I flip it over so that the wrong side is showing. Every round I flip back and forth between the right side and the wrong side. I'm going to start my second round now with a chain of 3, and you can see I've held my tail together here with my starting yarn, and I've caught that first chain with my tail. I'm going to chain 2 more. And now as I work my granny clusters, I'm going to just be crocheting over this end. I always like to start my next round of granny squares 1 stitch or 1 corner or section over from my last round where I have all these tails. I like to start at 1 section over to the right so that I can kind of work over those tails more easily as I work around on my granny square. Okay, I have made my 2 corner granny squares on my second round here, and I'm again at that same point where I have 2 stitches on my hook, and I have this little tail down here from where I started. And again, I'm going to bring that up behind my hook like I did at the end of the last round to catch this little tail. And again, then I'll be able to work over that on my next round. Now I'm going on to the second corner, and of course I'm going to go right over top of that, these tails over here. Okay, now I am to the point where I've done my 2 corners and I have these 2 tails that are hanging out, and I need to get those tails over to the next corner. So I'm just going to weave my yarn through these stitches to kind of work them over to this corner. So I just use my hook and I pull the tails through the top stitch here, and I just kind of weave them back and forth. I usually do it through 2 stitches. Like that. And then I can go ahead and work over them as I do my third corner. Again, I still have this tail hanging out here, and I'm going to just weave it through some more stitches here at the top to get it over to the last corner. And I'll finally work over that on this last corner. And that really gives it a really, you know, there's just no way that that's going to work its way all the way out again, so it's going to be nice and secure. And I can go ahead and cut off that tail. And that's basically it. I'll do one more round so that you can see that process one more time, but you've basically seen the tricks that I have for weaving over or crocheting over my ends, and so that I don't have to weave them in. Again, I flip my work over again, so this is now the wrong side you're seeing on the outside round, and I flip it over, and I'm going to go into the corner that's just to the right of my first tail so that I can work over that as I go around. Same as you've seen before, I stop right here when I still have 2 loops on my hook on this first corner so that I can catch that little tail in my work and bring it to the outside of the square. I have a little tail here that I'm going to just weave through these stitches. And if it's not quite long enough to reach to the next corner, then that's okay, then it's probably, you know, good enough. But it reaches a little bit here and I can go over it. I just have this one more tail to weave through my last few stitches here. While I'm at it, I'll go ahead and show you how I would crochet these 2 squares together as well. So I have just done 1 granny cluster of 3 double crochets and 1 chain on this side, and I would then use my hook to do a slip stitch into this corner on this square that I've already completed, and do a slip stitch, and that counts as my second chain stitch as well. And then I'll do my next set of 3 double crochets for my granny stitch. So I finished my corner here, and now I'm going to do a slip stitch into this corner, or I'm sorry, into this opening here on this square to join those two. And now I have this tail to weave over, and so I'm going to do the same thing where I weave my tail through a couple of stitches to get over to the next opening, and I have this one on this side to also do to get over to the next spot where I will do my next cluster. And I can go ahead and weave over or crochet over that end as well. You can still see a tiny little bit of this yarn sticking out here, but that can be trimmed off now. It's been worked over enough to be secure. I'll do another slip stitch into the opening across from where I'm working. And again, I'll weave this tail through these stitches to get over to the next corner. And I'll do another slip stitch in the corner, and then I'll chain one, and that'll count as my 2 chains for my corner stitches. And now I will cut off my last piece there. And so you can see I still do have a few ends, but again, as I continue to make my project larger, I'll continue to work over those little bits. And these tiny little ends have already been worked a lot as I've gone along. They're probably secure enough, but I usually continue crocheting over my ends as much as I can until they're too short to work over. And again, that one little tail that I wasn't able to get to the next opening, that's secure enough. I can just cut that off. So that gives you an idea of how I make my granny squares so that I don't have a ton of ends when I'm all done. I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye.